Thank you very much, Professor. Let me add my, congratulations for all the hard work that's been done and to welcome the colleagues. Maybe about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, we had a little trouble in Jamaica with one of these hydrometeorological events. My particular community was severely impacted. Not as bad as Minister DeRose was 2 years ago, but we lost a lot of life and we lost a lot of real estate and assets. And it occurred to me then that the way we did development was not really proper. We followed a lot of examples from other places, and we at best we could, at times, we tried to make what we had work, whether it was housing, whether it was water supply, whether it was education. But in a world where we are already past the greenhouse gas concentration to take us to 2 degrees on average, which is very problematic because you know the problem of averages. It's never quite what it's supposed to be, but it's an average. It's not really good for planning. It's really good for indicative things. And it came to me that if we did not do different, we would have a very difficult future, or no future at all. So we started the Caribbean Climate Change Center, which is the first kind of institution in the region, and indeed in anywhere in the world, to help islands deal with climate change impacts. And what we don't want to see are the things that we shouldn't be seeing if we're going to build a resilient economy and a resilient society. And basically, we use one little definition that I'll share with you of what we see as the resilience of a small island state. And resilience is linked to vulnerability. If you don't have any vulnerability, you really don't need to worry about resilience. But I don't know of any such thing that don't have any vulnerability. So resilience is always necessary. And we basically said that it's the ability to respond and recover is linked to the national capacity, which determines the ability to extract and efficiently utilize energy, food, water from the natural resource base. Because in small island states, the natural resource base is the basis of the economy. The most important of those is basically starts with the energy sector. And one of the great definitions I had was from a colleague in Norway who said that the quality of life of any society is directly proportional to the availability of energy and the efficiency at which it is converted to goods and services and the associated environmental impact. And this last part is where we totally went off the rails with our fossil base. So the first thing we would see in a resilient country is limited visits of petroleum boats. Maybe only a few times a year for very critical petroleum products, lubrication oils, and other things that are needed, but not the weekly or monthly cargo that comes in and leaves the country poorer. The second thing that we should not see is a high dependence on food imports. We in the Caribbean import, and this is not the case for Dominica, you're fortunate, but in my place, 90% of all the food we consume is imported. Now, there's a little equation. It says a ton of cereal is equal to 1,000 tons of water. So where you import your food from is going to be impacted by the kinds of climate they have. So if you are depending on somebody else's land and somebody else's water to feed you going forward, you are highly vulnerable. So your agriculture sector has to look a lot different. And some of you who I speak to when I've been in Dominica before know that I've pointed out that certain crops really, as you say, cannot continue. Let's take a favorite crop of ours in the Caribbean, the bananas. We've been struggling to keep banana alive for almost 30 years. I wonder how much resources that we have dedicated that if we knew what was now, what we would have done with it differently. So we would spend differently. For example, in agriculture, we should be looking at very high value materials. I heard on my way from the airport this morning, UNDP, new grant, small grant that was going to deal with things like essential oils, maybe things like coloring. Does anybody here know how much does Mars spend a year in coloring, Skittles and all those things? Billions of dollars. Yeah? Is there anywhere in the Caribbean with all this biodiversity that we have, that we are making use of colors and flavors and essential oils and pharmaceuticals and cosmetics? The whole realm of the agricultural sector should change, because we don't need it to be as vulnerable as it is now, which means more perennial crop, less annual crops. When you lose a banana tree, it's 1 year before it recovers. So we need crops that will recover much faster, that have much higher value, and have the ability to add value at the community level so people can have a decent quality of life. Because at the end of the day, the reason we're doing this is basically to improve the quality of life of the population. It is not to make any kind of statement. It's to benefit the individuals who are the members of our society. So we see a much different agricultural sector. And in the agricultural sector, there are lessons for us to learn. In biology, many of you probably learned in high school that the more resilient biological system was the more diverse it was. So the more diversity there was the quicker it recovered. So if you have 5 or 6 crops as your agricultural sector, it will do a lot better than 1 and 2 crops in case you have a natural disaster. The energy sector, I said, should look a lot different, but not just in terms of the boats, but in terms of how your energy is generated, distributed, and used. I heard many times Ambassador Henderson over the last 2 days talk about geothermal. And those guys who know here know that I'm a big fan of geothermal. I think if you have geothermal, your first responsibility is to make it work for you. Why not? It doesn't take any space. It's a couple of pipes in the ground. And it's an endless resource that you can, I think I heard Prime Minister Skerritt say, it is the basis on which you can build an economy, because you can export it, you can produce things because your cost of power is low. And one of the problems that we had in building resilience, which is generating an economy that can actually have resources to invest in preventing things, rather than trying to hunt resources after the incident to repair them, is basically where the economics is. What generates you money? And if you can have cheap energy, you can manufacture. Trinidad and Tobago teaches that. Just about everything in the Caribbean says made in Trinidad and Tobago. Why? Because the price of electricity is about 8 cents. How, if you have 30 cents per kilowatt hour, how do you think you're going to compete with somebody at 8 cents per kilowatt hour? Unless we want to go back to the days of slavery where we pay people nothing and they work for free. But that doesn't get us to no quality of life. So that is not an option. So the energy sector is absolutely key. Education and governance. Our education system has been based on curriculums that we have imported, and over time we have tried to adopt them. We have to change our education systems. In 10 years, we should at least have gotten to a point where all the teacher training colleges now have newly trained teachers who can teach the new techniques, the new systems, the new language of resilience and sustainability. And that should branch out from there. But most important, we need the education system to change the governance systems. Because as it is, the governance systems based on the portfolio is a big weakness and a big vulnerability to us building resilience. If you remember, I just said about the synergy that is needed to make things resilient. Well, it doesn't just go for plants, it goes for institutions. If institutions don't have synergy, all they're going to do is actually be getting in each other's way. My favorite example is the road paving and the water commission. And these are in my country. The guys will pave the road this week, nice, and then you bet a month down the road, you're going to go home one evening and one piece is going to be blocked because somebody didn't change the pipeline. This is very inefficient use of resources, particularly when you're in a small island where we are limited resources. 10 of the 14 most indebted countries in the world are small island states. If that doesn't speak to the failure of the kinds of economics and the kinds of practices we have had, then please, somebody give me another indicator, but I think this is bad. So we're looking at a governance system, and I think this is where CREAD really has a role to play, is being kind of the wires that knits the portfolios together to ensure that information moves between the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Tourism, the Ministry of Industry. Because if you're not going to build your industry on local material, what are you going to build your industry on? Somebody else's imported raw material? Hasn't worked. We've been trying that for a long time. We need to build our industries and our manufacturing on our raw material so we have the comparative edge. So we have to ensure that the synergy is within the government. We have to ensure that the Ministry of Finance is more in tune with how the ministries need to work together and actually be the one who upholds the synergy. If you misbehave, you get a little tap or however big tap that comes to make sure that you're not acting contrary to what the country needs. And then the whole issue of going back to the quality of life, which is the security and the essential services. We need to make sure, and this is one of the fights I've had with my colleague at the World Bank for a while, basically getting hospitals to be off-grid. We need to ensure that hospitals and other essential services are off-grid. That is, the time when the population need them the most, they shouldn't be at their least availability. That makes no sense whatsoever. So we see hospitals, essential services, as places where the population is always going to be served without long delays in the provision of services after an event. And then my final point, and then I will stop and we can come back later with the harder question, is there is no completion date to building resilience. All we can have is milestones. Because we continue to emit greenhouse gases at record speed. And until we stabilize the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, we don't know what the final climate is going to look like. So we are at 400, and we are at a rate of increasing greenhouse gas emissions that we have not experienced before. There's never been on the history of this planet that high level of greenhouse gases and this many people on the planet. So in a few years, with weather disruptions, we could easily see massive starvations. This is something you have to face up to. This is a reality that you have to deal with, and it basically comes back to the reason why agriculture and land use management, which I would put probably at the top of my list, has to be priorities for Dominica and other small islands going forward. So thank you, moderator.